Mid-year is a great opportunity to do a check-in and a goals refresh, but the process of this can be a little bit daunting, especially if you want to set robust goals for the period ahead that you actually end up achieving. To help you out with this, I'm going to take you through my process for reflecting on the first half of the year and also setting my goals for the second half, or in particular for me this is going to be for quarter 3, so July, August and September. As you can see, I've already gone and scaffolded out a few different sections that we're going to be filling in, and I do have a free printable resource with all of the steps that we're going to be looking at today. Our first section of this though is reflection, because I find it's very important to look back and consider where we've been, what we've done, and where we are now before we start setting our intentions for the period coming. Our first stage in this is to look back and record our memorable experiences from the first half of the year, and thankfully there are several sections in our bullet journals we can use for this. So we can use our future log for an overview of the happenings that happened in the first half of the year. We also have each of our monthly logs, which offer usually a little bit more of an in-depth look at each month in particular. And what I also have are my monthly reflections, where I have a dedicated memory section in there. These monthly reflections are also where I'm going to be finding information for our future steps. It's okay if you don't do these, you can just flip through the rest of your journal and look at your daily log entries or your weekly logs. All of those can help jog your memory for doing this reflection. As you can see, I've already set up 2 of the spreads that we're going to be filling in this video. In terms of the spacing of those, I actually decided this after I'd done my brainstorm for each of the different sections. Just because I didn't want any wasted space, because these pages needed to fit in before my July setup, which I've already done. If I were doing this from scratch though, and didn't already have July set up, I wouldn't have pre-sectioned out each of these different areas. I would have just used as much space as I needed to, and then capped it off with the next section. And our next section is the goals that I worked on in this period. So as this is my mid-year check-in, it's the goals worked on for the first 6 months of the year. And you can see there are a couple of different ones that I worked on. This is the second step of our reflection process, so writing a list of all of the goals that you set yourself for the previous period. These don't need to be the goals that you actually achieved, it's just rewriting those ones that you had set out to do. What I'm also going to do here is just put a little indicator to say whether I did or didn't complete the goal or whether I'm still working on it. So the JCC meetup, that one did get finished. The trip to the US also got finished. Regular live streams I'm going to say are finished, even though the live streams themselves are ongoing, because I've gotten into a pretty good routine with those. The office organization, while my organization process is never truly done, I have done a very decent job on that. So the project itself, organizing my desks and my storage areas, that technically is finished. My 101 things is ongoing, as is my community strengthening, building financial health, releasing a merch type product, doing the Bujo Basics series, and my work routines. So for all of those, I'm just going to indicate it with an arrow. And that arrow can effectively mean ongoing. The third step for our reflection is recording the milestones reached or wins that we had in the first half of the year. Again, I've pre-sectioned off this area because I already went through my previous monthly reflections and pulled out all of the wins that felt like bigger achievements. It's important to note that these wins don't have to be huge, life-changing milestones. Little ones matter too. I'm a big believer in the idea of small progress is still progress, and small steps lead up to big progress. So for instance, cancelling Netflix and Disney Plus may not really seem like much of a win, but it is very much a milestone that I reached with regards to building financial health. Why pay a subscription for something you're really not getting a lot of use out of? Our fourth step though is to record any challenges faced or difficulties that we had in the first half of the year. These again don't need to be really huge challenges. It doesn't have to be something like my entire house burnt down, which if that did happen in the first half of the year, I'm really sorry to hear that. That completely sucks. That is quite a challenge. But for me, some of my biggest challenges are related to stress, or not taking care of myself, or having issues with focus and motivation. Although they may just seem like mundane parts of life, they do certainly make it harder for me to achieve my goals. And by naming them and writing them down, we can actually start to think about how we might mitigate them, or how we might tackle or combat them. Along with considering the challenges though, it's also important to consider how we did respond to these, whether they were positive or negative responses. Recording what we did to respond to the challenges we faced gives us the opportunity to consider how constructive they were. Did we do things that actually helped to mitigate these challenges, or tackle them in some way? Or were our responses just adding fuel to the fire? Were they just making things worse for us? I find that many of the responses that I have to the challenges I face can be useful in some instances, but usually have some kind of caveat. For instance, giving up in certain situations can actually be useful if I need to just set something aside and take some time to recuperate, but it's not so great if I don't give myself a time limit for when I need to come back to something. For instance, in June, I decided that my self-care habits were taking a backseat while I tried to work a little bit harder to get things done. The problem was I didn't set myself a deadline for when I was going to pick those habits back up again, or make a conscious effort to do so, which kind of just led me to a little bit of a downward spiral in terms of both my physical and mental self-care. Other responses I've had are things like time tracking, which I found super useful for certain challenges, and also removing myself from situations that didn't feel safe. Though the caveat with that is that it can be kind of difficult to do in some situations. Our next step though is to look back on everything we've recorded and write down a list of the lessons that we learned about ourselves. I'm going to keep these particularly related to goal setting or goal getting, but they could be things like things that do or don't motivate you, things that you commonly find challenging, or just other aspects of life. I actually used to keep a full list of lessons learned in my journal, in particular for those lessons that I felt like I had to learn a couple of times, like the fact that I kept on buying this particular brand of roti at the supermarket, and every time I'd get it home and remember, wait, you don't actually like this. It might seem like a silly thing to write down, but just the process of writing down, you do not like this roti, helped me remember it next time I went to the supermarket. Our reflection is in two parts though, so while this was all about looking back, what we now want to do is flip on over and start looking at the present. The first step in this, or step 7 of our reflection, is to write a list of each of your life areas. I've already got mine out because I use the same ones every single time. And we're going to rate each of those out of 10. Now, rating life areas out of 10 can be a little bit tricky, can become a little bit subjective. So to help you out with that, I do have an example rating scale, which is attached to that printable that I mentioned before. But effectively, it just goes through each of the numbers 1 to 10 and gives it a little bit of a description so that you can use those descriptions to give your life areas that rating. I've used that scale to rate each of my life areas, and as you can see, the ones I have are physical health, mental health, physical environment, personal development, financial health, professional health, social relationships, partner relationship, family relationships, and leisure and fun. I'm a big believer in the idea that life areas are unique to each person, so spend some time considering what your life areas are, the ones that are actually important to you. Write them down and then use that rating scale to rate each of those out of 10. What I also like to do is do this rating on a quarterly basis, so along with noting what I'm rating each of these areas this time around, I also wanted to put in my ratings from last time I did this scaling. The ones for this time are the black dots, and the ones from last time are the grey dots. Then, so that I can remember what each of those coloured dots actually represents, I then just draw a little arrow to show how my scores have changed. So either going up to the new score or going down to the new score. You may have seen that I did accidentally stuff up one of the arrows and drew it in the wrong direction, but this is easily fixed by just sticking over a little white sticky label. I'm actually kind of surprised to see how many of these scores went up. I typically find that there's a pretty good balance between ones going up and ones going down, but we had physical health and mental health both going down by 1, that's not surprising. We had physical environment going up by 1, as did personal development and financial health. Professional health went up by 2, social relationships stayed the same, partner relationship went up by 1, family relationships went up by 3, and then leisure and fun went down by 1. Our next stage in assessing our current situation though is considering what's bothering us. Again, this can be things that are big or small, but this is one of the questions that we can really use to consider what kind of goals we might want to set in the upcoming period. Typically, I like my goals to respond to some kind of challenge that I'm facing or something that's bothering me, so taking the time to consider what those things are can be really useful. Another area that I really like to set goals in though are things that I am excited about. I find that I make a lot more progress on goals that I have some kind of enthusiasm towards, so considering the things in our life that we are currently excited about, and we could set goals around those to bring in more excitement or more joy into our lives, that can also be a benefit. That's the step that I'm filling in at the bottom of the left-hand page here. Again, you'll see that a lot of the stuff that's bothering me is about energy and motivation and stress, that kind of thing, and stuff that I'm excited about is mainly related to content making, that kind of stuff. Our next step for assessing the present though may look like 3 separate things, but is actually just writing lists of things that we want to keep doing, things that we want to start or change or try, and then stuff that we want to stop doing. I've labeled these as keep, scrap, change and try, but you could have this as keep, stop and start. In terms of the keep section, you're thinking about stuff that you have in your life that brings you joy or satisfaction or fulfillment, whereas the things that you might want to scrap are the stuff that is stress-inducing or time-wasting, stuff that doesn't get you where you want to go. In terms of the things you might want to try or change, these could be tweaks to try and make things that realistically you don't want to be doing easier to not do, or it could be about making things that you do want to do easier to do. These again can form the basis for your goals for the next period. In terms of the things that I want to keep, they're really about connection points, about simplifying, streamlining, that kind of stuff. The things that I want to scrap are mainly around procrastination and kind of negative habits. And then the stuff that I want to try or change is kind of a mixed bag, so things like weekly household meetings, celebrating smaller milestones, because I have a tendency to either not celebrate my milestones or only really focus on the big ones. But as we said, small wins are still wins. And we have a couple of other ones in there too. Flipping over, and we're into the next section of our mid-year check-in, and this is the goal setting stage. As we said, reflection helps us direct our focus when it comes to setting goals for the period ahead, so doing that first was important, but now as we've done that reflection, we can start to consider what we want to do in the season coming up. For me, that's going to be Q3, but depending on how you like to set your goals, you might want to set them on a half-year basis or even just a monthly basis. I typically tend to like to set 3-month goals or quarterly goals, which I can then break down into monthly action plans. I think that 90 days or 3 months is a really good amount of time to focus on my goals. It's enough time that I can actually make a decent amount of progress, but not so long that I get completely bored. As you can see, these pages weren't pre-set up, so I am putting in a little bit of washi tape for decoration, just because I'm more likely to come back and use these pages if I like the way they look. And I can also write in the header and the title for our first section, which is going to be brainstorming the goals that we have for the upcoming period. At this stage, we're not committing to any of those goals, we're just writing down our ideas, so make sure to write down anything that comes to mind. Typically for brainstorming, I do like to do this in a journal that I'm not so particular about in terms of the way it looks, but because I want to keep this one looking fairly nice, I'm just writing it out as a simple list. What I have found really helpful previously though is drawing this out as kind of a mind map, especially when you have goal ideas that could be related to each other. So for instance, if physical health is one of your goals, are you more thinking about the movement side, or are you thinking about eating or water intake? These could all be part of one bigger goal or separate smaller ones. But in this step, we're just writing out all of those ideas. I'm leaving the end of the left-hand page open just in case I have any other goals that I want to jot down in that brainstorm. But our next step in the goal setting stage is to review our reflection and our brainstorm and note any recurring themes. Themes that come through in multiple places, or themes that have multiple entries, could indicate goals that we might want to work on. So sifting back through and looking for those can help us set goals that are going to be meaningful and impactful for us. I'm going to be indicating these themes just using some dot markers. I probably won't need every single one of these colours, but it's good to have some range. And what I'm going to be doing is listing the color code underneath my themes header on this right-hand page, and then going back through my reflection and my brainstorm to see which entries relate to those themes. Rather than picking out all the themes first and then going back through, I'm just starting off with the themes that I already know are present because I've literally just filled in this brainstorm in the reflection section. As we go back and sort through these entries though, it just gives us another opportunity to try and find those themes because as said, these can be a really good basis for your goals. If you find that things are coming up time and time again, it usually indicates either an area of life that you're particularly passionate or excited about, or an area of life that really needs some more work. For instance, one that I knew was coming up a lot were things like physical health, stress, procrastination, and those are all things that are more in the kind of negative category for me, or things that aren't going so well. Whereas things like content creation also came up a lot, but that's more because I'm excited and passionate about it. Now as I've got my theme dots in, and as said, not every single one has a theme dot. Also, some of the themes do overlap, for instance, procrastinating my budget population, that's related to finances and procrastination. So I put one dot over the other. I probably could have just put in 2 separate dots, but at least it's still there as an indication of what it relates to. Now as we've got all of those then, it's time to decide on what my goals are going to be. First, we'll put a header in for the section to show that this is my official list of goals for quarter 3. And then I'll just go back through my brainstorm and through my themes to decide what those goals should be. I'm trying to write each goal as a simple statement that resonates with me so that I can then take that statement forward and use it as the basis for my goal planning. One of the things that I noted in the lessons learned space with regards to my goal setting from the past half year is that my goal statements are much more likely to be successful, or I'm more likely to be successful with my goals if those statements are really specifically worded. I don't mean specific as in at certain date or time I will have done A, B, C, D, but more so specific in terms of an easily identifiable metric of success. For instance, my first goal that I've written down is hard launch my website, and once the launching of that website happens, I know that that goal is completed. Similar idea with make 4 weekly set menus for meal planning. Once I have those 4 set menus, I know that goal is done too. A much more vague way of wording that would be something like eat healthier dinners. But how do I actually measure that a dinner is healthier? Healthier than what? Does having one less fry from McDonald's actually count? In my soul, I know that that's not aligned with what I'd want that goal to actually be, but it does technically fit the bill of being a healthier meal than the alternative. This type of goal though, so making 4 weekly set menus, not only is going to help me in terms of my health-related goals, but also in terms of my stress-related goals. Meal planning is certainly a cause for stress in our household, so having some set menus to fall back on, which we can then switch out or change certain meals if we want to, is just going to make life a lot easier. You'll also note that some of these goals are much bigger than others, whereas some of them are a fair bit smaller. And I find that I need this variation in terms of my goals so that I have some long-term things that I'm working on, things that I can get really in depth with and take a little while and have multiple parts, and stuff that's a fair bit smaller, things that could kind of be considered quick wins so that I can keep myself motivated. You can see on the header that I've also written out the word EPIC. And this is actually an acronym. It stands for enjoyable, practical, impactful, and challenging. And that's because in the next step, for each of those goals, I'm going to be rating it out of 5 in each of those categories. So 5 being the most of any of those, so the most enjoyable, the most practical, and 1 being the least. I like my goals to be as epic as possible. I just know that I'm more likely to actually work on them if its epic score is higher. And as said, doing that rating is the next step in the process. You'll note that any of the ones related to physical health have the least enjoyable rating. I'm trying to be more optimistic about them because I feel like if I go in with the right mindset of this could be enjoyable, like we could have fun with this, I'm more likely to actually do them. What I also like to do as part of my goal setting is give myself one distinct reason to work on those goals. That's individually, not combined. So for instance, identify and schedule batchable tasks. This is related to work tasks in particular. What is my one compelling reason to work on that task? While you could write out a list of, say, 10 or 12 different reasons to work on a goal, especially depending on the goal and how many areas of your life it's going to service, I find that coming up with one compelling reason is a lot more impactful. This reason is the thing that you can tie that goal to and come back to when you're feeling a little bit of a motivation slump or not really feeling like working on that goal. So for me, identifying and scheduling batchable tasks, this one very much relates to my stress management. If I can batch my tasks, it means that overall they take less time, which means I have more time to dedicate to other things, which decreases my stress. But that one compelling reason that I'm going to write down is just going to be stress related. Rather than write that down here, we are going to flip over, and this is where I'm going to be doing my goal planning. We're not necessarily going to need a full page for every single goal, and you can see I have a couple of different goals. And rather than working through this process with every single one of them, which might be a little bit boring, we're just going to take that identifying and scheduling batchable tasks, and I'm going to do the next stages with that one in particular. As said, outlining the reason you have for working on the goal is part of the goal setting process, but here we're also getting into the goal planning process. I find that a lot of people set goals, but they don't necessarily plan them, and I think that the power is in the planning. Once we know what our goals are and what we're working on for the upcoming period, the plan is what actually gives us that roadmap for attacking the goal, or tackling it, or actually making progress. What we're setting up here is what I'm calling a master plan. So this is something that I can come back to each month to draw from or select my action steps from. The first step in the actual goal planning stage is to write down our ideal outcome for the goal. This ideal outcome should be for the end of the period rather than for life in general, especially if you're working on quite a large goal. For instance, one of my goals from the previous quarter was to build my financial health, and an outcome for building financial health on a quarterly basis, or 3 months, looks wildly different to building financial health over the next, say, 15 years. If you are working on a goal that is long-term like that, it might even be beneficial to write down 2 ideal outcomes. So an ideal outcome for the long-term vision, and another ideal outcome for the period of time you're looking at. As said, we're looking at a quarter here, so my ideal outcomes are based on the next 3 months. For this goal, I've said that my ideal outcome is that I have clear reference lists of regular tasks for JashiiCorrin. These are organized by batchability. I have very batchable tasks, either already batched for the rest of the year, or calendar dates scheduled to work on them. So for example, a batchable task could be taking pictures for Instagram, but I'm not going to take those pictures for 3 months out. I might take them for a week or 2 weeks. So that level of batchability is different compared to something like the Year of Planning Challenge, where I've got the prompts for the entire rest of the year written out. I just need to make the pictures and make the captions. So that level of batchability is different compared to my Instagram posts, which is also different compared to my YouTube content. But our next step after identifying our ideal outcome is to brainstorm and write down the metrics of success for this goal. So selecting the ones that will best let us know that we're making progress. This could be something like a percentage completed. This could be something like hitting different statistics or different numerical amounts of something. For instance, having a certain number of days in the month with a completed habit, or a certain number of consecutive days doing a particular thing. It really depends on the goal that you're working on. For this goal though, my metrics of success are to 1. Have my work task list written, 2. Have my tasks organized by their batchability, and then 3 is to have my batching done for 2023. And I've split that into 2 different sections, so either the ones that are already done, they're fully batched, they're ready to go, and the ones that are scheduled. So that could be, for instance, scheduling my filming days up until the end of the year. As said, you'll have different metrics of success for different goals, really depends on what you're working on. But our next stage in our goal planning process is to start to brainstorm our action steps. This is where we start to see how these goals are actually going to get worked on. So what things are we going to do to make this goal happen? You can see I have some columns running down the left-hand side here, and I've put the header in of OMWD, which stands for O, one-off tasks, M, monthly tasks, or things that need to be done month after month, W for weekly, so done each week, and D for daily or done each day. Once you've finished brainstorming your actions, you do want to check that they are 1, actually actions, so things that you can actually do, and 2, that they're simple enough that they won't overwhelm you. If a task is too big, it's more of a project than it is a task, then breaking that down here can be really useful for when it comes to doing your monthly action plans. For your monthly action plan, you want to be able to take those individual smaller tasks and put that on your list rather than really big projects, which once you put a couple of them on your monthly action plan can feel super overwhelming. We don't want to be overwhelmed. We don't want to overwhelm our future selves. So we're doing future us a favor by writing these things out in really simple individual tasks. Underneath our action steps list, we're going to write a list of any resources we need. Thankfully, this isn't a resource-intensive goal, but some of your goals may require more resources than others. Resources can include anything from people, to books, to tools, to programs. Again, very much depends on the goal. For this goal in particular, the main resources that I need are somewhere to write down all of these work tasks, and then something to organize them in easily. For this, I am going to be using digital tools, so something like Microsoft Word to write out the initial list, and then Excel to sort those work tasks. By considering and writing these down, it also gives you another opportunity to think about action steps you might need to take, for instance, acquiring those resources. Depending on where you're writing this plan out, it could pay to then transfer it into something like a journal or a more permanent location. I've done mine fairly neat and already in my notebook, so I'm not going to transfer mine anywhere. But you want this master plan to be usable for the next period of time, whether that be the next quarter like it is for me, or the next half year, or however long. What I now need to do is go through the rest of these goal statements and set up more master plan pages like this. But remember, we do have a free printable of all of the steps we've talked about, and that one's linked in the description box below. If you were looking for more videos on goal setting in your journal though, the playlist here is where it's at, so click or tap on that one and I will see you over there.